In a media landscape where narratives often overshadow facts, a recent clash between Sunny Hostin of The View and conservative commentators Charlie Kirk and Megyn Kelly exposed the fragility of carefully curated public personas. The conflict began when Hostin, a co-host known for her outspoken progressive views, made comments on air that targeted a group of young attendees at a Turning Point USA Summit, an event organized by Kirk. Hostin's remarks suggested that the 5,000 high school and college students who traveled across the country to hear conservative speakers were associated with extremist ideologies. This sparked a swift and surgical response from Kirk and Kelly, who dismantled her claims with a combination of data, logic, and calm precision. What unfolded wasn't a loud, theatrical showdown, but a quiet, devastating takedown that revealed the inconsistencies in Hostin's public image. The controversy stemmed from Hostin's attempt to frame the summit as a gathering of dangerous radicals, a narrative that Kirk and Kelly argued was not only misleading, but also a deliberate smear. Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA and author of The College Scam, emphasized the harm of such accusations, particularly when directed at young people. He noted that these students, aged 16 to 22, had traveled to engage in political discourse, only to be painted as extremists by a prominent media figure. The implications were serious. Such claims could cast a long shadow over their futures, associating them with unfounded allegations of extremism. Kirk didn't just take issue with Hostin's words. He challenged the broader pattern of selective outrage that her comments represented. Hostin's remarks were part of a larger discussion on The View, where she also touched on the voting patterns of various demographic groups in recent elections. She pointed out that 52% of white women, particularly those she described as uneducated, voted for Donald Trump, while emphasizing that Black and Latino voters largely supported the Democratic candidate. Her framing suggested a moral and intellectual superiority among those who aligned with her political views, while dismissing Trump supporters as uninformed or misguided. This rhetoric, while not new for Hostin, provided the opening for Kirk and Kelly to expose what they saw as a double standard in her approach to commentary. Kirk responded with characteristic directness, avoiding the emotional theatrics that often dominate such disputes. He pointed out that Hostin's criticism of the summit attendees was not just an attack on him, a public figure accustomed to scrutiny, but on thousands of young people who deserve better. He highlighted the effort these students made to engage in civic discourse, traveling long distances to hear diverse perspectives. Kirk argued that Hostin's decision to label them as extremists was not only baseless, but also a calculated move to discredit conservative ideas without engaging with them substantively. He suggested that The View's audience might question their assumptions about conservatism if they knew the truth, that thousands of young people were motivated enough to attend such an event despite economic challenges like high gas prices and expensive flights. To drive his point home, Kirk brought up the possibility of legal action, referencing the high-profile defamation case involving Covington Catholic High School, which resulted in a substantial settlement. While he didn't commit to a lawsuit, he made it clear that he and his team were consulting with lawyers to explore their options. The threat of legal consequences underscored the seriousness of his response, signaling that he wouldn't let Hostin's claims slide without accountability. Kirk's approach was not about grandstanding, but about laying out a clear, evidence-based case that challenged Hostin's narrative. Enter Megyn Kelly, whose response complemented Kirk's with a different kind of intensity. A former attorney and seasoned journalist, Kelly approached the situation with the precision of a courtroom litigator. She didn't need to raise her voice or resort to personal attacks. Instead, she methodically dissected Hostin's public persona, exposing the contradictions that underpinned her commentary. Kelly pointed out that Hostin's outrage often seemed selective, flaring up when it served her narrative but vanishing when the facts didn't align with her brand. For instance, Kelly highlighted Hostin's tendency to criticize conservative voters while ignoring similar issues within her own political camp. This double standard, Kelly argued, was not just a flaw in Hostin's arguments, but a deliberate strategy to maintain her image as a moral authority. Kelly also brought attention to Hostin's personal background, not to attack her, but to contextualize her rhetoric. Hostin, a graduate of Binghamton University and Notre Dame Law School, has built a successful career, earning millions as a co-host on The View. Her son attends Harvard, and her family enjoys a level of privilege that contrasts sharply with her public narrative of systemic oppression. Kelly juxtaposed these facts with Hostin's comments about the uneducated and her broader critiques of American society, suggesting that Hostin's portrayal of herself as a defender of the marginalized was, at times, performative. By laying out these details, Kelly painted a picture of a media figure whose outrage seemed more tied to ratings than to principle. What made this takedown particularly effective was the synergy between Kirk and Kelly. Kirk brought the raw data, voting records, public statements, and the tangible impact of Hostin's words on his organization's attendees. Kelly, meanwhile, provided the analytical framework, breaking down Hostin's arguments with a liar's eye for inconsistency. Together, they didn't just challenge Hostin's claims. They unraveled the entire persona she had built on The View. Hostin's brand relies heavily on her ability to project moral clarity, often positioning herself as a voice for justice in a flawed world. But Kirk and Kelly showed that this image was less about conviction and more about carefully curated moments designed to elicit applause. One of the most striking aspects of this clash was its asymmetry. Hostin operates from the platform of a major network show, surrounded by a supportive audience and co-hosts who often reinforce her views. Kirk and Kelly, by contrast, delivered their critiques from outside the mainstream media bubble, relying on their own platforms, podcasts, social media, and independent outlets to reach their audience. Yet their response was far more impactful than a traditional TV rebuttal could have been. They didn't need a studio audience or a live debate to make their point. They let the facts speak for themselves, amplified by their ability to connect directly with their followers. Kirk's approach was grounded in a broader critique of media hypocrisy. He argued that outlets like The View thrive on creating echo chambers where certain narratives go unchallenged. Hostin's comments about the summit attendees, he suggested, were not just a one-off mistake, but part of a pattern of dismissing conservative voices without engaging with their ideas. He contrasted this with his own willingness to speak at universities and public forums, even in the face of protests and threats. Kirk noted that when he visits liberal campuses, he often faces aggressive opposition, including from groups like Antifa, yet he continues to advocate for open dialogue. This, he argued, stood in stark contrast to Hostin's approach, which seemed to prioritize shutting down opposing views rather than engaging with them. Kelly, meanwhile, zeroed in on specific examples of Hostin's contradictions. She referenced a recent incident where Hostin criticized Brittany Mahomes, wife of NFL star Patrick Mahomes, for liking a Trump-related social media post. Hostin suggested that Mahomes, as part of an interracial marriage, should have known better than to support a figure she labeled as problematic. Kelly dismantled this argument by pointing out its speculative nature and its reliance on guilt by association. She argued that Hostin's comments were less about substantive critique and more about signaling virtue to her audience. By framing Mahomes' actions as a betrayal of her family's interests, Hostin was engaging in the kind of moral grandstanding that Kelly saw as emblematic of her broader approach. The combined effect of Kirk and Kelly's responses was a masterclass in media criticism. They didn't just call out Hostin's errors, they exposed the mechanics of her public image. Hostin's brand relies on a delicate balance of righteous indignation and selective storytelling, but Kirk and Kelly showed that this balance collapses under scrutiny. They didn't need to match her volume or her theatrics. They simply presented the facts in a way that made her contradictions impossible to ignore. The result was a takedown that felt less like a shouting match and more like a forensic audit, revealing the cracks in a persona that had been carefully polished for public consumption. What made this moment particularly significant was its broader implications for media discourse. Hostin's comments, and the response they provoked, highlighted a growing divide between traditional media and independent voices. Platforms like The View rely on their ability to shape narratives through emotional appeals and selective framing, but figures like Kirk and Kelly represent a counterforce, one that prioritizes data and direct engagement with audiences. This clash wasn't just about one TV host or one summit. It was about the power of facts to challenge narratives that have gone unquestioned for too long. In the end, the takedown of Sunny Hostin wasn't about personal animus or petty drama. It was about holding a public figure accountable for words that carried real consequences. Kirk and Kelly didn't need to step into a studio or face Hostin on her own turf to make their point. They used their platforms to deliver a critique that was sharp, precise, and unrelenting, proving that truth doesn't need a megaphone to resonate. For Hostin, the lesson was clear. When your image is built on curated outrage rather than consistent principles, it only takes a few well-placed facts to bring the whole thing crashing down. And for audiences watching from the sidelines, it was a reminder that in the battle of ideas, receipts always beat rhetoric.